right, let's say a prayer, and then we will get into Genesis 28, I think, is where we are supposed to be. Okay, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we're so grateful to be here this morning, and thank you for the family that meets here. Please be with the elders as they shepherd us. Please be with us as we continue to go through Genesis and look at the first families that you used to bring about the fulfillment of promise in Jesus. Please be with us as we look at the lives of the patriarchs, specifically Jacob this morning, and help us to learn what you want us to from your word. Thank you for what you've recorded. Please bless us as we try to draw closer to Jesus and help us to see Jesus in the text. All this we pray in his name. Amen. Okay, so we're getting further and further into the story here. We're down to the third patriarch. So we studied Abraham in chapters 12 through 23, and then Isaac just gets a little sliver, which is chapters 24 and 26. And now we're going to be looking at Jacob. I think the goal is to get through about chapter 31, first couple of verses of 32. So we'll still have a few chapters left to look at. And then we'll close out with Joseph. So as you look at this schedule, we're down to chapters 28 through 32, so about halfway through. We're going to pick up in 28b. We looked at the first 5 verses last Sunday, where Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and directed him not to take a Canaanite wife because he's fleeing for his life. He's stolen the blessing from his brother Esau. Esau wants to kill him, so his mother told him, you've got to run, you've got to flee. And before he leaves town, Isaac is saying, don't marry a Canaanite, marry somebody else. And then we have Esau. Esau sees that his choices in marriage were causing his parents distress, so he marries an Ishmaelite daughter in verses 6 through 9. And then we pick up with Jacob in verse 10 and start going through his journey. All right, so I'll stop there for a second. I don't want to do all the talking. Any questions or anything from last week's class that we didn't get to that you want to talk about? What did we learn about Jacob's character? Nothing? He's kind of what?
Devious.
Oh, he is devious. He tends to get it from his mom because she was masterminding a lot of that, right? She did. How to be a trickster, right? Deceptive. I mean, he was deceptive with his dad. Really took advantage of his dad's failing health and failing eyesight and all that stuff. Anything else? Like, you really shouldn't like him at this point. He's not that good of a guy. But he's going to become the patriarch. So really, this section that we're looking at this morning is really the transformation of Jacob, where God humbles him and he experiences it's not karma because it's the judgment of God, but it looks like karma. Like if you weren't a believer in God, you would think that it was some Eastern, like what you reap what you sow and it's coming back around on you. But really it's God at work. And so some of the things that we're going to see in his relationship, especially with Laban, is Laban is going to treat Jacob in a way that he had been treating Esau. And so hopefully we'll point out some of those similarities.
Would he have been that way without his parents? One favored one favored the other.
Yeah, so you did have that family dynamic going on where you had favoritism at play, and the text really emphasized that. Yeah, very good. So something to note, there was a commentator that said this about Jacob. So this quote on the right-hand side of the screen. The biography of Jacob as an independent personality, a patriarch in his own right, now begins. Like this is his story. The home-loving favorite of an overprotective mother is now in exile, utterly alone, not alone and friendless. So he was a homeboy, he was a mama's boy, and now he's running for his life and he's got nobody and nothing. Okay, so he had tricked his brother out of the birthright, he had stolen the blessing, but he's got nothing. Like he doesn't even have a pillow. He has to use a rock. Okay, so you kind of get the picture of like the prodigal son a little bit. All right. So looking at the text, the breakdown here, 11 through 15, you have this dream revelation where he has this encounter with God before he fully leaves Canaan. And so we'll talk about that. And Bethel, you have what happens at Bethel, and a vow that he makes before he leaves, kind of an agreement with God. And we'll talk down through that. So picking up really it's verse 10. Jacob left Beersheba. He went toward Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and the east and the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and I'll bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. So he's the third in the line, Abraham, Isaac, now Jacob, who receives these promises. And the timing is interesting. That's right. All he's got is this. And he didn't know he was getting it when he went to sleep that night. Like he went to bed, fell asleep, and God reveals all of this. But before we get to the promises, what does he see? Yeah, what kind of ladder?
I kind of like picture it as like a stairway, not like a
Yeah.
typical ladder.
Yeah.
Something that's easily accessible.
Yeah.
That God is kind of revealing to him, I've made a bridge now between heaven and earth.
Yeah.
It's going to be Jesus. That last part of that.
Yeah, so the word is a super unique word. It's not used, this may be the only place in the Old Testament that it's used. And in other places, the word is used to describe kind of like the steps of a ziggurat. So think like Aztec temples. If you were to put a set of stairs going from the bottom of one of Egypt's pyramids to the top, like one of those stepped stairways going up. And that's more of the picture. And he sees angels going up and down, so from where they are with God to earth. And he doesn't hear anything from them, he just sees them. But then at the top, he sees some semblance of the Lord. Verse 13, behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord. Right? Now, this is not unique. I really appreciated Terry when he kicked the class off and he was making comparisons between the Hebrew text and creation accounts in other cultures, right? And flood accounts in other cultures. And this picture of some kind of connection between the spiritual places and earth is not new. Like, this is not unique. People had those kind of pictures in their head, right? Now, this is biblical. This is revealed by God. So this is unique. But it's communicating something going on between God and the heavenly places and earth. So think a lot like what we've been studying on Wednesday nights in Job, where you have the divine council and they're talking, but then stuff is happening on earth too. Okay? But the big deal is the promises. God passes the promises down, and they've been getting more specific. All right? But let's pick up in 16. We'll read down through the end of 28. So Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't know it. And he was afraid, and said, "How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." I don't know that it's as limited as that, but in his brain it was. It was the first time he had ever experienced something like that. And what he says in verse 17, "How awesome is this place?" The Israelites actually use that phrase when they start singing to God in Exodus 15 of their deliverance. How awesome is God, and how awesome is this place? So in verse 18, early the next morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at the first. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that you give me I will give a full tenth to you." What do you think about his vow or his promise there? Yeah.
If you'll do this, then I'll.
What did God just promise? He would do it. Yeah. So there are some people that think what he's really saying here is, since God will do this, since God will do it, I will commit myself to him. But I don't know, because when you get his return back into the land, and he wrestles with God, and he's given a new name, and God takes his hip and messes up his hip, then he enters into a new relationship with God. So you do kind of see this, God, I'm waiting to see if you're going to perform. So I think it points a little bit to how superficial his relationship was with God. It wasn't super deep yet. Yeah, that's a great word, honed. That's exactly right. Refined. And he's going to do it. Yeah, he's going to do it in this section.
So, when Jacob ends up wrestling with God, do you think he recognized him from the dream that he had with the ladder?
That's a great question. I don't know.
Because it seems like when he meets this person, he knows that he needs to hold on.
Yeah, he knows he's
Something
unique.
special, something
Yeah,
I wonder if it's the vision he saw of God.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know. Hang on to that, and let's talk about that more when we get to his wrestling. Okay, so this homeless, familyless, penniless man is going to go back to where his family came from in chapter 29.
What about his giving a tenth there?
What do you think about that? Who's he giving it to?
God.
How? When the church meets the next Sunday and they pass the plate? Like, I don't know, Joe, because it doesn't specify. It reminds me of Abraham. You know, after Abraham rescued Lot and brought those people back, and he met the king of Salem, Melchizedek, and he gives him a tenth of what he rescued. And Melchizedek is a priest to God Most High. So Abraham gives a tenth, and we have that example. And so a tenth makes sense, but how he was going to give it to God, I don't know.
But at this point, he didn't have anything.
No. So it was like it was a promise of,
And I'm wondering how he got the oil to pour the stone.
so he probably had whatever provisions his mother sent with him for the journey.
He didn't have anything, but it also says, and of all that you give me, I will.
Yes. So it's a promise of, depending on how much I get, it will always be a tenth, but I don't know how much that tenth is yet because I don't have anything yet.
So is that where people give tithing?
No. So, I mean, you see the examples here, but when you look at Numbers and Leviticus, then the Levitical or the Mosaic law specified giving a tenth to the Lord of different things. So the Israelites were instructed to give a tenth, and that's where they get tithing. Yeah, good question. Good question. And the stone deal, setting up a stone, that was very culturally normal. This commemorative marker. Here I raise my Ebenezer. By thy help so far I've come. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So here are our divisions, and you see more stones. Jacob arrives at the well in verses 1 through 3. 4 through 8, he meets the shepherds, and they explain what's going on. 9 through 12, he meets Rachel. 13 through 20, he's betrothed to Rachel. And then 21 through 30, he gets a weird, horrible surprise. It's not Rachel. Okay. So 1 through 3, Jacob went on his journey. He came to the land of the people of the east. And he looked and he saw a well in the field. And there were 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it. All of those sheep were watered from that well. And the stone on the well's mouth was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep and put the stone back in its place over the mouth of the well. And so one of the things that's emphasized here is the size of the stone. And normally it takes a plurality of men to move the thing. They wait till everyone's there, and then multiple guys move it, and then multiple guys move it back. And Jacob's the one in verse 4 that initiates the conversation. Like, he's the stranger, he's the sojourner, but he's the one who says, "My brothers, where do you come from?" And they explain, "Well, we're from Haran." And he asks them, "Well, do you know Laban?" And they said, "Yeah, we know him." And he said, "How's it going with him?" And they said, "It's going well. See, here comes his daughter with the sheep. Here comes Rachel." And he said, "Behold, it's still high day. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go pasture them." And they said, "No, it's not time. We cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep." Like, we've got to wait. He's like, "Hey, there's this young lady. Her sheep, it's like they're hot and they're thirsty. We need to take care of her sheep." And they're like, "No, she's got to wait. She's got to wait for everybody." So verse 9, while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep. She was a shepherdess. Now, as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. He just goes over there and muscles the thing. And they're all watching. And then verse 11, Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. Now, the kiss was not anything more than a cultural greeting at this point. Okay? This was not a, "How you doing?" And like kisses. Like, that's not what he did. Right? He's making the connection. And she runs off and gets Laban. And when he heard that his nephew was there, he runs out, embraces him, and kisses him. Same word. And brought him to the house. And Jacob told Laban everything that had gone on, although I'm pretty confident he left out the bit about him stealing the birthright and stealing the blessing. I'm pretty sure there was some intentional editing of the story when he gave his uncle the news of how he wound up there. Okay? And what was Laban's response to all that at the end of the story, verse 14? What did Laban think about him? Yeah, man, your family. And I know it's like this Jewish thing that's developing, but this Italian, your family, and starts taking care of him. But the guy's got to work. And so verse 15, Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." Like, let's work out the payment here. So Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah. The name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Jacob loved Rachel. And he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel." And Laban said, "It's better that I give her to you than that I should give her to any other man. Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love that he had for her. Oh, like a sweet love story. Okay, because we haven't seen this kind of interaction leading up to a marriage yet. Like Isaac and Rebekah, the servant goes and finds her and says, hey, will you go? And without knowing the man or meeting the man, she travels and is like, yeah, I'll marry this total stranger. And so she goes, right? We don't know what it was like for Abraham and Sarah. Like they just show up in the record and they're married. And so this is the first time you see the interaction. And there's this love there. But there's this important word that's introduced in verse 15, the word serve. Okay? And this great point was made, and so I put it up here on the overhead. Do you remember when Jacob and Esau were wrestling inside of her? She's like, what is going on? This is a weird pregnancy. What is happening? And she inquired of the Lord, and the Lord revealed, okay, there are two nations warring within you. And this is the language. The original oracle to the pregnant Rebekah forecast that the older shall serve the younger. Esau would serve Jacob, okay? And let peoples serve you. That was the blessing that he stole from Isaac. And then he told Esau, I have given him all his brothers for servants. You shall serve your brother. But here Jacob is, away from home, and he has to serve. And so the text keeps using this word all through this chapter. He had to serve. He had to serve. He served for 7 years, but it was as nothing to him. And then he has to serve another 7 years. So you start to see this. God had promised this thing, but now Jacob is having to serve because of his foolishness. Does that make sense? Okay. That's not the only thing that's going down. So it got to the end of verse 20. He's served his time. It's time for payment. So 21, Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is completed. Like 7 years is up. So Laban gathered together all the people of the place, and he made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. She's going to come into the story later. And in the morning, behold, it's Leah. And this is always, like, how do you not know, man? Okay. So, culturally, during the wedding ceremony, the whole process, which usually ran about a day, and then you had a week's celebration afterwards, which comes up in this text. You know, Laban ends up saying, hey, give Leah her week. So all the parties and stuff that go, like, let her have her, this bridezilla moment. But she wasn't. I'm just saying, she wanted her parties. But part of the process was, on the day of the wedding, she was veiled.
Okay, would she be completely veiled or her eyes showing?
So the text doesn't say anything about her eyes. I don't know exactly what the veil would look like. Typically, I think the eyes were showing.
But
She's got to be able to see.
she's got weak eyes, I wouldn't know.
Yeah. So we haven't really touched on the weak eyes. Weak eyes doesn't mean poor eyesight. Weak eyes just mean dull. You know, you meet somebody and you're like, man, you have bright eyes. Like, your eyes sparkle. And then some eyes just like, are you there? Like, the spark is not there. And the difference between the girls was Leah didn't have very shiny, bright eyes. Leah's were less. Okay.
Homely?
Yeah, I think that's the picture. So for the wedding day, she's veiled. And if she's really trying to deceive him, they could have worked something like, hey, make sure you've always got your back to him, or make sure you're standing in the shadows, and don't speak so he can't hear your voice. Like, all the stuff that he did with his dad is now happening to him. And he's just so excited that the 7 years is up. He's love drunk. Like, he's just I'm sorry. There are just some things about it that doesn't make sense.
He's not expecting this treachery.
No, he's not. He's not. Like, for whatever reason, Laban's character is taking years to come out. So he expects Rachel. But I'm sorry, for those of us that have gotten married and you get to like the honeymoon chamber, like give me a break. I know they didn't have as much light, so you had that. Like I don't know what all went down, but whatever, he did not figure it out until the morning. And that whole behold, ta-da! But it's done. Like he's married her, he's had the first night with her, he's hitched. And it's really interesting. In the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, "What have you done to me?" Sounds kind of like his brother. What have you done? Right? And it's going to come back a little bit later when he tries to leave. Laban's going to be like, "What have you done?" Like the guys just keep crossing each other. And his frustration in verse 25 is, I served you, there's that word serve, I served you for Rachel. So why have you deceived me? And what is Laban's answer? Yeah, that's our custom. Look, that would have been nice to know before yesterday that was the custom. Like, I would have found somebody that would have taken Leah. We could have found someone to, like, take care of this, and I could still marry the girl I want to marry. Apparently that was news to Jacob. And he's been there 7 years. It has not been brought up. He doesn't know. So what's Laban's solution? You can have both. Just another 7 years. If I were the girls, I would be so, like they're being treated like property. He's bartering his daughters for labor. And good labor, because Jacob has been a good laborer. I mean, as they go back and forth a little bit later, he helps say, hey, you have prospered because I've been here. But he strikes a new bargain. Give her week, and we'll give you her, but you have to serve with me for another 7. So that's what Jacob did. 28, like there's nothing else he can do. If he wants to marry Rachel, he's got to do it. So Jacob did so, completed Leah's week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. And then she gets a female servant named Bilhah, who's going to come up in the story later. So Jacob went into Rachel also in verse 30, and he loved Rachel more than Leah and served Laban for another 7 years. Like, this is horrible. This is horrible. And these poor girls. Like, if you're Leah, you're chopped liver. Like, he didn't want to marry you in the first place. Your dad had to trick him to make him think you're the sister, and she goes along with it. And she has one night where she's being treated like she's loved, but it's not real. It's fake because he thinks she's somebody else. And then the very next day, he's like, I didn't want this one. And your dad forces him to like give you whatever for 7 days, but he has to. It's not because he wants to. He has to. And then after the 7 days, your sister marries him, and she's it. Like the whole dynamic, this whole thing is set up so badly. And we're going to see, so that whole favoritism thing that Ellen mentioned, you know, the parents having favorite boys, now it's favorite wives, and then it's going to turn into favorite kids again. And it's just a mess.
And it is, well, it's a soap opera.
It is a soap opera.
But,
It is.
But it really sets the stage for enmity between these sisters.
Yeah. So this is the beginning of the Israelites. Like, this is where the founding fathers of the 12 tribes are going to come from. They're the boys that Jacob's about to have with these women. Like, God uses this family, this broken family, with favoritism and jealousy and all this other stuff, to bring Jesus into the world. And so if God can use broken, messed up people like that, okay, and remember, he's being molded and refined. Like Jacob is in this refinement period. He's still not everything that God wants him to be yet. And so he's not really responding to all this that great either.
He thinks back to what he did to his father.
Yep. You know he's thinking about all that, and he's feeling regret. You know that. Okay. So the significant phrases, the stone, he moves this stone, it's mentioned 3 times. This idea of serving is used 7 or 8 times. Her weak eyes, there was Leah. that is the introduction the next morning. Behold, ta-da, there she is. And then him using the, why did you deceive me? Using what his brother had said. What have you done to me? Why did you deceive me? So we're going to go through the next several years as he's serving and having his family. And that picks up in verse 31 of chapter 29. No, we still want to be back there. Do we? Jacob's betrothal, Laban's deceit. Nope, we're on to the next one. Jacob's children. So the children here, you've got the 11 sons that are born. Benjamin is not born in this list yet. But you've got the 11 sons and then Dinah that are listed. Okay, so you've got the sons, eventually you get to Benjamin. You've got Leah's 4 sons, and then you've got the 4 sons of the handmaids, and then you've got the 4 sons of the 4 children of Rachel and Leah again. And on the right, the account of the births is arranged according to maternal order. So you've got Leah, the handmaids, and then the sisters again, as they interact with each other. One of the key words is that word unloved in verse 31. Some of our older English versions say hated, and we'll talk about that. God opening her womb. There's a lot of opening of the womb, closing the womb. She's barren. And then Jacob, when Rachel's like, give me children or I'm going to die. And he's like, am I in the place of God? Like, we're doing what we can and I can't control that. So significant phrases in this short section. So verse 31 of 29. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated or unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. What does it mean that Leah was hated? Like, did Jacob walk around shooting her dirty looks and being rough with her? And
I think it's like when in the New Testament we talk about you must hate your family, hate your mother, hate your father.
Yeah.
It's love less.
Yes.
Love less.
Yes.
So it's love them less than you love me. Well, I think she just
Yeah.
loved less.
It's in comparison to another, right? And it's used in the New Testament when I think it's Paul who quotes and says, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. Well, God chose Jacob. It's not that he hated Esau, but he favored one in his plan over the other. And that's what that phrase means. So it's not like he just outright hated her, but in the hierarchy of the family, his preference was Rachel. You gonna say something?
I was just going to say the 2 masters. That's what I think of as well.
Yeah.
You'll love one, hate the other.
There you go.
Which means you love one more.
Yeah, one has priority, right?
One gets attention, one gets special things, and the other
Yeah.
one, you're just there.
Yeah. So, look, anytime someone starts to make a case for sister wives, they have not read Genesis, and they do not know women. All right? This does not work. It doesn't work. There's just no way for it to work. God designed marriage to be an exclusive relationship between one man and one woman. That is the way he designed it. And you monkey with that, and people get hurt. It doesn't work.
Can you imagine 2 wives that are after you?
Nope.
How about 700?
Nope. Nope. Solomon. So God, when he sees that Leah is less favored, he makes her fertile and then shuts down the factory with Rachel. He's like, Leah, you're going to start having kids. And so you have these 4 sons that are born to her, and they start naming them significant names. Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, For she said, because the Lord has looked upon my affliction, now my husband will love me. You know, God saw me, he favored me, he let me have a kid, and it's a boy, and so now Jacob's going to love me.
Unless he hated her, he
Wouldn't be intimate with her.
intimate with her. Having
Right.
children over and over again.
Yeah, yeah. So she conceived again in verse 33, bore a son. Because the Lord has heard that I'm hated, he's given me this son too. And she called his name Simeon. And then she conceives again and bears a son. This time my husband will be attached to me. So she calls him Levi. She conceives again, bears a son. This time I will praise the Lord. And they call his name Judah. And then she ceased bearing. Like every time she got pregnant and every time she had a boy, she thought it was going to change the dynamics. And it didn't. And that had to be really hard. But it was impossible. Like it was an impossible situation between the sisters. And so then you get Rachel at the beginning of 30. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, you know, she has her sister popping kids out one after the other, and Jacob's just, he keeps going back to her, and their sons, it says she envied her sister. And so she said to Jacob, give me children or I shall die. And his anger was kindled against Rachel. And he said, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? He's like, God did this. I can't do anything about it.
This is a real matter of status in that culture.
It was. It was. So she takes the route of Sarah. I know, Ellen's like, nobody learns. How did it go for Sarah? Not good. When she gives her Egyptian handmaid Hagar to Abraham and says, hey, we're not having the kid of promise. Bear children through Hagar, which was a culturally acceptable thing to do. This idea of having your concubine bear children and you adopting them and ratifying them like they are an heir. And so that handmaid that her father gave her, she gives her servant Bilhah to Jacob and says, go into her so that she may give birth on my behalf. She'll be my surrogate, that even I may have children through her. And so Jacob's just like, okay. And so he does. And Bilhah conceives, bears a son. Verse 6, Rachel said, God has judged me. He's heard my voice. He's given me a son. So he's named Dan. And then Bilhah gets pregnant again. They have another son. With mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, which is like Jacob and Esau wrestling inside. And they name him Naphtali. And then Leah, when she realizes, wait a minute, I'm not having kids anymore, and my sister is using the handmaid, too can do that. Hey, Jacob, I've got a handmaid too. And he's like, okay. And so then you get a couple of sons, Gad and Asher, through Leah's servant. And then you get this weird, the mandrakes, where Jacob gets bought for a night. Where he obviously is not visiting Leah as often as he had been. I mean, imagine this guy. Now he's got 4 women that he's trying to keep happy and contented and, you know, making them feel valued in some way. And whatever his rotation is, he's not spending much time with Leah anymore. And so in the days of the wheat harvest in verse 14, Reuben, the firstborn, went and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. And then Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. And mandrakes in the ancient world were an aphrodisiac, and they were used for fertility. And so Reuben has brought this thing, like he knows what's going on in the house, and he brings this stuff to his mom. And so Leah is probably going to make use of this. And Rachel's like, hey, I could use some of that. So verse 15, she said to her, is it a small matter that you've taken away my husband? You want to take my son's mandrakes. So I'm like, so stupid. Go pick your own mandrakes. Rachel said, then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes. Like, I'll do you a deal. Like, give me some of the mandrakes, and you can have Jacob tonight when he comes home. And so Jacob came in from the field that evening. Leah went out to meet him and said, you must come in to me because I've hired you with my son's mandrakes. He said, okay. So he lay with her that night, and God listened to Leah. She conceived, bore Jacob a 5th son. His name is Issachar. And his name has association with God has given me my wages And so Issachar's name reminds everybody of when Leah purchased Jacob. It's just so messed up. And then it just keeps going. Leah conceived again. She bore the sixth son, Zebulun. Then she bears Dinah. And then God, in verse 22, remembers Rachel. He listened to her. He finally opens her womb, and she has Joseph. And then she asks for another son. Now, that doesn't happen in this chapter, but it is a messed up family. And this whole time, he's working for Laban. And that's getting harder because Laban keeps changing his wages. And he's trying to cheat him out of his wages. And Jacob keeps changing the animals, trying to work genetics, trying to get the stronger of the animals. And Laban ends up getting the weaker of the animals. And he thinks he can change their spots and stuff with sticks and whatever. Like, that's not how genetics works. But, like, God allowed it to work. Okay, so at the end of the day, the stronger, healthier herds were his payment, and Laban's were less. There were less of them, and they were the weaker of the flocks. You get to chapter 31, we're going fast, but he decides it's time to go. Because in verse 1 of 31, Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's, he's gained all his wealth. And then 2, Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. So the Lord said to Jacob in verse 3, return to the land of your fathers. Time to go home, and I will be with you. So things are souring, and he's got to get out of Dodge again. And so he has this long conversation with Rachel and Leah. Says, this is what God has said. It's time to go. And they agreed with him. Let's go. And they talked about Laban and how he squandered the money and squandered the benefit that they got from Jacob. But before they leave, what did Rachel do? Yeah. She takes the household gods, these little figurines that were small enough to sit on later, right? So they take off. Verse 17, Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock, all his property, the livestock in his possession, all that he'd gained to go back to the land of Canaan. So when he came to the land, he had nothing. But he's leaving with a huge family and a lot of prosperity. And so he's moving slower. Laban chases after him with his guys. And they have this going back and forth. Laban accuses him of stealing the gods. He doesn't know anything about it. So he says, search whatever you find. Like, if someone's taken it, that person's dead. He doesn't know it's Rachel. And so how does Rachel keep her father from finding it? I can't get up, Dad. It's that time of month. And he's like, oh, okay. And he backs out, and she's sitting on the idols. So not only is it this deceptive thing, but technically she's defiling the idols. Now, they end up going through this covenant process where Laban is like, let's set up some stones. Let's set up some stones. And you're not going to cross over this way, and I'm not going to cross over this way. And you're going to take care of my daughters. You're not going to marry anybody else. It's like, dude, I've got 4 wives. I'm not going to marry anybody else. But he's like, promise me you're not going to marry anybody else. They end up having a meal together. They set up a stone as a pillar. It's going to be this testimony to what goes on. And then he interacts in 32 verses 1 through 3. There's this interaction with angels again. And so this guy made the point, just as Jacob's outward journey from Canaan was marked by the appearance of angels at the ladder, so his return to his native land, there was the angelic appearance, providing a literary framework for Jacob's time with Laban. That's kind of neat to see. Laban uses the phrase, what have you done? And Jacob refers to God as the fear of Isaac. This neat phrase. Either like he's the God we hold in awe, or God terrifies my father. Yes. Take your pick. All right. We rambled. We went really quick. Thank you guys for that. We'll pick up in the beginning of 32, and we'll keep going. If you need an outline of what our schedule is, it's up here on the table. Feel free to take one of those. And Lord willing, we'll keep going next Sunday. Okay? Yeah, absolutely.
Sermon slide you gave us was a sermon that you've already preached.
Here?
It's on Nathan.
No, that's not right. That's not right.
Probably mislabeled it when you saved it.
Yep.